Welcome back to Nourished and Free, the podcast. This is a show that I host because I really want to help you with creating a healthy relationship with food and with your body and fitness. And I want to make sure that your mindset is in the right place to support that as well. Who am I? I'm Michelle Yates. I'm a registered dietitian. I have my master's in health psychology. And if you're new here, welcome. This is going to be your new favorite show if any of the things that I just said interest you at all. So typically, I really love to talk about disordered eating, especially binge eating and emotional eating and yo-yo dieting. Those are really my wheelhouse, and I work with women constantly on how to help them with that. So if you're new to my world, be sure you check out my show notes to get more info on how to work with me in those ways. But today, I really wanted to talk about IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. And this isn't my wheelhouse. It's not my specialty. So I wanted to bring on somebody who does specialize in this, because I think that so many people are struggling with IBS, or they think they might be, and they're not sure what to do about it. Another thing too is that so often there is an overlap between disordered eating and chronic dieting and trying to cut out foods as you try to lose weight, and then IBS-like symptoms. And so it can be difficult to know if you really have IBS or if you've just restricted food so much that your gut is kind of messed up as a result. So we're going to dig into this and more. And today I'm bringing on my friend Jessie Wong. She's a registered dietitian, and she is so incredibly smart and knowledgeable in the field of gastrointestinal disorders, especially IBS. She is the IBS dietitian on Instagram, and she's a great follow. Highly recommend. And I'm also going to put a bunch of links in the show notes for other resources that she has for anybody who just wants to know more about their gut or their poop or anything like that. Before we dive in, be sure you're subscribed to the show. I'm sure that you are already, but just in case, because I've got some really fun episodes on the docket that you're not going to want to miss. And if you haven't taken a moment to do so, please be sure you rate the show or leave a review. I cannot even begin to tell you how helpful it is. We did make it into the top 50 charts recently, which is so exciting. But the thing with these charts is that as more people are rating other shows and those shows are climbing to the top of the charts, my show can get pushed out of the charts. So we do need you to leave a rating or review if you haven't already, so that we can continue to get the good word out about evidence-based nutrition and creating a healthy relationship with food. So now that you have heard my plea for leaving a rating, let's dig into this episode. There's a lot of really good info, and I don't want to waste another second. Welcome to the show, Jessie.
Thank you for having me. Hi,
I'm so
everyone.
happy to have you here. We are going to talk all things IBS. And I was actually peeking at your website last night, and I saw that you used to be a CPA, right?
Yes.
That is wild. So what was the transition point? Like, at what point were you like, this isn't for me, I want to go into dietetics?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. Most people don't know that about me, but I was a public accountant, so working for one of those big four accounting firms, and it really burnt me out. And then one day I just thought, I'm done counting money for the wealthy. I want to do something that can actually make a difference in the world, maybe in one person or two people. And I've always been interested in nutrition. And as we know, probably, all of us, when we start, we just look online and learn as much as we can. And now after going to school and actually being a dietitian, we know all of those things are probably in some capacity, they're not quite the truth or the facts about nutrition. So at that time, I just wanted to learn more, and I wanted to really be in a profession where I can care for people. And I think that's my personality, is not counting numbers. It's more, I'm a person. I'm a people person. And I really want to be in a business where I can help people and have a meaningful career instead of doing accounting. Sorry, accountants out there who are listening to this. It's important work. It's just tedious work. We've had so many accountants in our family. I think there's only one person left who's still in the business of accounting. Well, it was also around the time when I met my husband, and moved to Indiana to study dietetics, and then also get my degrees at IU, and also had two kids. So it was a good transition for me to also do bearing child and having kids, while I'm in school, which makes life a little bit easier than when you're working. Also challenging because I had to do my internship when I had the second baby, which was really hard.
No kidding.
But yeah. But then, I think for most of us as dietitians, we enjoy everything we learn at the internship and then like seeing all different things that dietitians can do, inpatient, outpatient, school lunches, breakfast, what else? Long-term care, community. I think it was really fun and I've not regretted at all becoming a dietitian.
Good.
We make significantly less than accountants, I would have to say. I
Yeah.
think that might be the only
Yeah.
thing that I think you cannot be as fulfilled as I am right now with my career if I was doing accounting.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's the backstory.
I love that. You went back to school and took a pay cut, but your heart got bigger.
Yes. Oh, I love how you
Yeah.
phrased it, summarized it perfectly.
Well, we're happy to have you in the field. And I'm so glad that we got connected too. We just got connected not too long ago. And I'm so glad we did because I feel like I've been looking for somebody who can be a great go to source for me when I have questions about IBS as I'm helping patients or just to refer patients to or clients to. So I'd love to pick your brain a bit or a lot about all things IBS. Why don't you, for the listeners, just kind of give us an overview of what IBS is?
Mhm. So IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. And it is a disorder of the gut brain interaction. And what it means is that your brain and your guts are not communicating at the right pace. And some of the common symptoms are motility disturbances. So somebody might be running to the bathroom or maybe not having a bad movement. So it could be, well, let me bring it back a little bit. There can be different types of IBS constipation predominant, IBS diarrhea predominant, IBS mixed bowel type. So going back and forth between constipation and diarrhea. So those are the three most common types. And then there's also unclassified, which is when you have all of the symptoms of IBS, which could be changes in motility, hyper sensitivity in your abdominal area or in your GI tract, altered gut microbiota, altered central nervous system processing. Like these are all symptoms and and a lot of the symptoms that people relate to or complain of are related to defecation, right? So we talked about different types of IBS and related to the changes in frequency of stools and also changes sometimes in the form or appearance of stool. And people most complained of bloating, pain, and sometimes even spasms in their gut. And we relate those symptoms, that feelings that you have of the symptoms, as to hypersensitivity of your gut, visceral hypersensitivity. So that is IBS in a nutshell. Now, to diagnose IBS, that is quite challenging because all GI conditions, and I really mean all GI conditions, have the same symptoms. People may be running
Yeah.
to the bathroom, people may not be pooping, people may have pain, bloating, gas. Like these are all symptoms of all GI conditions. How can we diagnose IBS? And that is by criteria, right? You have to have those symptoms: bloating, pain, constipation, diarrhea, and it has to be persistent at least once per week. And you have to have the symptoms for at least 3 to 6 months.
Mm.
And also, once you have all of these symptoms, your doctor needs to rule out other conditions, and other conditions such as celiac disease, which is so hard to diagnose. It can take up to 10 years for somebody to get a celiac diagnosis if you're persistent with, getting the right diagnosis, which is very sad because 80% of celiac patients are not diagnosed. Only 20% are diagnosed, and we have a really good treatment options for patients with celiac disease, and that is being adherent to a very strict gluten-free diet. Okay, so celiac disease is one that usually your doctor will test you out of. Inflammatory bowel disease is another one that doctors will usually test patients out of before giving them an IBS diagnosis. And of course, there are other conditions such as H. pylori, endometriosis,
Hmm.
and what else? Bile acid diarrhea, which is not often diagnosed, is usually diagnosed as IBSD,
Okay.
or pancreatic insufficiency, exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, and sometimes even some kind of other carbohydrate malabsorption or fat malabsorption conditions that may be misdiagnosed as IBS as well. So these are all things we want to test out of before doctors give you an irritable bowel syndrome diagnosis. And one thing that is very makes it very different, makes all these conditions very different than irritable bowel syndrome, is that within irritable bowel syndrome, there's no structural changes or no organic changes in your gut leading to disease. So it's mostly a gut-brain interaction issue. So your nervous
Mm.
system problem,
So
right?
there's nothing
And
like
with all these,
structural or like a
yeah.
lack of enzyme. It's just like
hmm
this kind of random
Right. Not a
disruption.
lack of enzymes, no erosion, inflammation. So in
Hmm.
celiac, there's inflammation causing like shortened villi in the small intestine, whereas in
Sure.
IBS, there's ideally your doctor would have ruled out celiac and have done all the blood work and scopes for it to rule it out. But again, celiac is really difficult to get diagnosed. And one of the things we see too is misdiagnosis of celiac as IBS.
Hmm.
That's the next part we can get to about elimination diets. And then with IBD and celiac and all the other conditions I'm talking about, there are a few ways to test these. There's blood work to test your antibodies for celiac disease. There's blood work to test for inflammatory markers for inflammatory bowel disease. So there's actually inflammation in the gut, right? And then sometimes physician will order stool tests to see if there's calprotectin in the stool, if there's inflammatory markers in the stool, because that can be an indication of inflammatory bowel disease. And sometimes, if symptoms are really severe and persistent, doctors will order scopes. And it could be colonoscopy and endoscopy. And there are multiple things that physicians are looking for. So they're looking for inflammation that may not be visible to the eyes when they're doing the scope. So they would do biopsies in the large intestines and in the small intestines. This in the small intestine, it can rule out celiac. But celiac again is a patchy disease, so which is why it may take a few rounds of doing endoscopy to really identify the disease. And then in the large intestine, sometimes they can see microscopic colitis, which is a form of IBD, and sometimes that
Hmm.
is closely related to IBS. Like patients may get diagnosed as IBS first before they get the actual IBD diagnosis, which is what microscopic colitis is.
Hmm.
And those are done via biopsies
Hmm.
after when they're scoping. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, I mean, what a long road to eventually get to a place where it's like, it's IBS. And I can only, I just feel for anybody that struggles with that because
hmm
it's, I mean, you'd have to feel miserable for so long before you can ever get some sort of label that helps guide your treatment, then I guess, of where we go from here, right? Because
hmm
obviously a label can be helpful if it's something like celiac disease. Then you know the treatment is okay, we're going to be avoiding gluten for the rest of our life because that makes us miserable. But
hmm
yeah, to have to wait for so long and be struggling with these symptoms, I can imagine is just debilitating.
It is. And on average, this is per research, it takes about 6 years to get an IBS
Mm,
diagnosis. Anything with the GI tract diagnosis takes a long time because we don't have good tools for diagnosis, right? We
yeah.
have the blood test, we have stool tests, but there's no specific markers that we're looking for. When it comes to IBS, it really has to be ruling out other conditions. And then, depending on whether your healthcare team is familiar with the condition, they might be reluctant to give a patient IBS diagnosis. And then, one of the complaints we hear a lot is patient talking about how they feel that their healthcare provider don't care about them once they get the IBS diagnosis, and they feel like there's nothing that is working for them when trialing it with their healthcare team, or maybe they just were told live with it. It's IBS, it's a chronic condition that you will have to learn to live with. Take Imodium, take laxative forever. That's it, goodbye. um,
Yeah.
It's something we hear all the time. However, you can actually find a provider who are willing to try different things with you. And I'm talking about provider who are actual gastroenterologists and not
Yeah.
providers in in more of the alternative medicine realm where things are a bit unevidence based, and usually we see
Bit
a lot
murky.
more harm
Yeah.
in that scenario for patients because they are doing tests that are not evidence based, such
Like
as
food
the food
sensitivity
sensitivity
tests.
test. And then we also see a lot of GI map, which is stool gut
Hmm.
microbiome test, which and there's a lot of hype these days, right? And the research right now, I actually just came back from the biggest GI conference in the world, is Digest Disease Week.
Ooh,
And
I want to go to that.
one of the present it was great. It's all about poop.
It's not even my specialty, but I'm still a dietitian. I love it.
Right. And one of the talk was talking about the validity of the current stool microbiome test. And then they just talk about all the different kinds of tests out there and how that we just don't really know enough about normal or optimal gut microbiome to say that,
Yeah,
hey, if you have more of this or less of this, that means something is wrong with your gut. And most of the gut microbiome studies are done in North America. And we know that if you live in different regions of the world, you are going to have different gut microbiome. Does it mean you have a
absolutely.
less optimal gut that you have to do something to change it? No,
Yeah,
we don't know. And
yeah.
the business model with these kind of gut microbiome tests is usually they sell it directly to consumers, or sometimes the not so evidence based providers will recommend it to their patients. And you do the test at home, collect the stool, put it in a box, send it back to the lab, and then they spit out this really fancy report giving you an analysis of what microbes you have, different colors ranges. And then it will usually say, hey, you have um, good microbes or bad microbes. They actually label it that when we don't even know what is good or bad or what's the optimal
Mm, yeah,
diversity. And then they would recommend regimens or protocols to help you fix your guts. And that
sure.
would be maybe restrictive diets or a ton of supplements. And we
Yeah, the
see,
pesky
and then
supplements.
right. Sometimes some patients are taking like 20 to
Sometimes.
30 supplements when they come to us. And the first
Oh,
recommendations we
so
have is like, please
expensive.
stop everything. Well, expensive is one thing, right? It can actually delay actual treatments and it
Yeah,
can cause more harm. And
yeah,
sometimes the things we see people deal with is persistent symptoms that won't go away that might actually be contributed from taking certain types of supplements. I'll
yeah.
be very brave here and say that probiotics and prebiotics are some things that we do not recommend, and
Mm,
we never recommend it for long term if they're specific. But there are a few that we recommend, two to be
yeah,
specific, that we recommend for specific symptoms, and
right.
it's short term. We
Yeah.
don't ever recommend anything long term because with probiotics, the research we're never done long term, right? The longest study might be 8 to 12 weeks. That's it. Like we don't
Oh, that's
know
interesting.
the long
Yeah,
term effects of taking a probiotics long term and how it's going to affect your gut microbiome. Anyways,
yeah,
the business model, so they sell supplements or restrictive diet to say like, let's starve out this, or let's feel more of this, let's take the probiotics, prebiotics, fiber, whatever, or sometimes even antimicrobial. And then after a while people will get tested again, and then they will see if the treatment worked or whatever, and then maybe repeated treatments or something else go on. And it's like an endless cycle, and this is a business model for these
right.
type of companies. And it's the gut microbiome companies and sometimes the food sensitivities companies do certain things like that as well,
Yeah.
which if you're listening to this episode, if you're considering, please don't actually go back to a legitimate physician, your PCP
Yeah.
or your GI. Now, finding a good GI can be tricky. What I usually recommend is go on to Google and look up GIs in your area and find a physician that has good reviews.
Yeah. That's fair.
It's so difficult to find the right
Yeah.
provider, but you know.
And something that I hear a lot too is that they just have such a long wait list. And I think in the midst of waiting, people are still so desperate for answers that they will then do these other things in
Hmm.
an attempt to figure something out in the waiting period,
Yeah.
which, yeah, I mean, as you alluded to, just isn't, it's doing more harm than good potentially than you just waiting it out, it
Hmm.
sounds like.
Right. We actually
Hmm.
have a very affordable self-paced program. It's called IBS Freedom. You can find it when you go to ibsdietitian.com/IBS-freedom. It's $49 a month. It's everything is self-paced. And one thing we want to use that program for is patient education. So you
Mm,
start tracking your symptoms. You start looking at, your bowel movements, learn what is normal, what may not be normal, and learn more about the type of IBS you have so that when you
yeah.
finally go in to see your doctor, you can share the right information. I'll
Yeah.
give you an
Which is so
example.
helpful.
Yes, it will be really helpful to get clarity faster and get the right test and get the right diagnosis
Yeah.
faster. I'm going to share maybe an example about bloating because bloating is
Hmm.
something that is the biggest concern for people.
Yeah.
And there are different types of bloating. I think people don't always recognize that, but there are different types of bloating, and different types of bloating can be indication of different area of your gut having issues or different causes of your gut issues. So with bloating, we always ask, is it above your belly button or below your belly button? Do you wake up bloated? So does the bloating occur overnight? Do you bloat right after eating? How long does the bloating last? How does the bloating correlate to your bowel movements? And do you see like a specific food trigger or maybe lifestyle trigger that contributes to your bloating? So these are things you want to document before going to your physician because that way they can kind of maybe pinpoint where the problem is and then they will ask you more specific questions. And all of the questions that I just said also apply to pain as well. Where is your pain? When does it happen? How long does it last? How often does it happen? Does the pain correlate to your bowel habits? Are there a specific food triggering your pain? So if you start documenting these things, you will probably get the right test sooner and maybe get to the right diagnosis faster.
Yeah. Then they have some leads on like, okay, this is where we're probably headed. Yeah,
Right.
that's good. And I know we got initially connected because of Dr. Andrea Love. She's going to come back on the show and we're going to talk about the GI map tests and the HTMI or HTMA, I think is what it is. And we're going
The
to do a
hair
deep dive.
analysis thing.
Yeah.
Oh
We're
my
going
God,
to do a
yes.
deep dive into those. So I'm excited for that. And if you're listening to this episode and you haven't listened to the food sensitivity test episode that I did with Dr. Andrea Love, that is just a couple episodes back. So definitely listen to that if you're interested in the topic of food sensitivities and food allergies and food intolerances. That's a good deep dive episode for sure. So it sounds like with IBD, Crohn, which would include ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, correct?
Mhm.
And then celiac, like all of these diagnoses that we need to rule out before we can get to the point of IBS. Am I reading between the lines here that those are all involving some inflammatory element, but IBS doesn't?
Mhm.
That's
Yes.
interesting because I feel like with IBS, I mean, inflammation is such a buzzword, but I feel
Yeah.
like usually I see those things together, from all the gut health girlies promoting their gummies and stuff, like reduce
Yes.
inflammation for your IBS. You know what I mean? So yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, speak a little bit more on that if you can and the
Mm.
differences there.
Right. So IBS, but now with IBS, sometimes we do see mild inflammations or maybe white blood cells being a bit higher in the GI tract. And this is where diet can really come in and help.
Yeah.
So, but before I jump into the diet for IBS and how it can help reduce symptoms, I want to say something about celiac disease. Celiac disease is extremely difficult to diagnose. If you are going through testings, make sure you are eating enough gluten prior to getting your blood work done.
Mm,
Because what we are looking for in celiac disease blood work and endoscopy is the inflammation. If you're not eating enough gluten, if you're having a little bit but not enough, it's not going to show up positive. This
yeah.
is where people or physicians get into trouble with when it comes to diagnosing celiac disease. It's really, really difficult to diagnose. You have to be eating the real research says 2 slices of bread, so 2 servings of gluten for 6 to 8 weeks. Now, if your test is coming up sooner than that, you ideally, I would recommend doing 4 servings of gluten every single day for 2 to 3 weeks prior to your test, so that we are inducing an inflammation in your gut so that the test can pick it up and
I
you
feel
will
like some
get the
people would
right
be like,
diagnosis.
sweet, I get to have 4 servings of bread today.
Yeah, okay.
With how much we demonize it, it's like, okay, cool. I got to prep for my test and have a bunch of bread.
Yes, it's kind of tricky because if a
Yeah,
patient do have celiac, so celiac is one condition, and then there's also non-celiac gluten sensitivity or
sure.
non-celiac wheat sensitivity, which is actually a condition we see a lot.
Mhm.
When they eat gluten, it's just miserable because
Yeah,
they are inflamed inside. Now,
right.
when it comes to IBS, right, there are different types of IBS and different causes to IBS. And you were asking the question about inflammation. So no, while most cases of IBS don't have inflammation or very, very mild inflammation, sometimes with the differential diagnosis that may be misdiagnosed as IBS, they can cause some sort of inflammation,
Mhm.
like undiagnosed celiac disease or sometimes even non celiac wheat sensitivity. When patients eat gluten, then they will have some immune system reaction because IBS does involve immune system reaction. Now, with IBS, because there's nothing structurally wrong, like organically, there's nothing really wrong with the gut, no organic disease.
Mhm.
And there's a lot we can do to maintain or, how do we say this, put your symptoms in remission with
Mhm.
diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Remission is not the right word for IBS because there's nothing wrong. Like with IBD, you can talk about remission, but with IBS, I think you can maintain or take control of your symptoms with diet and lifestyle. And we know that per research, the low-FODMAP diet is extremely helpful for patients with IBS because FODMAPs are a group of short-chain carbohydrates that we don't digest, we don't absorb, we don't break down. It just goes through our gut, gets to our colon. And the carbohydrates are fermented by our gut microbe. So this is actually low FODMAPs or higher FODMAP foods are actually really good for our gut and our gut microbes, right? Because they are a source of fuel for our gut microbes. However, for those of us with IBS, the action of having a lot of gas and air in
Yeah.
our GI tract that can trigger the hypersensitivity in our guts and causing us to have more symptoms, bloating,
Yeah.
pain, and distension. Now, when it comes to FODMAPs, there are 6 primary groups of FODMAPs, and some of the FODMAPs, I'm going to try to list it out here as fast as I can: fructose, lactose, polyose, and mannitol. Okay, so these 4, they are water soluble. So they have an osmotic function or characteristics when they are inside our gut. So when they get into our small intestine, they draw fluids into our small intestine. And a lot of IBS patients do complain of gurgling and just gushing or their gut making sound. And that's most likely the reason why. And when we have a hypersensitive gut, that feeling of fluids going around your belly is just uncomfortable, and people may feel distended when they're eating these type of FODMAPs. And all FODMAP groups are rapidly fermented. So the other 2 groups of FODMAP is GOS and fructan. So all of these are short chain carbohydrates. So when they get to the large intestine, like I said earlier, they are rapidly fermented, causing a lot of gas, bloating, and general discomfort for people with irritable bowel syndrome. And we know that for people without IBS, when we eat FODMAPs, it still causes the bloating, it still causes the fluids to go through your gut. But the difference is we don't have that hypersensitivity and we don't feel the pain, we don't feel the spasms, we don't feel discomfort.
Yeah.
So that's the big difference between IBS gut and a normal gut. Now, with the low FODMAP diet too, it is a short-term elimination diet and ideally should be done with the direction of a dietitian. with a guidance of a dietitian, because there are a lot of nuances when it comes to the diet, and people often do it wrong.
Yeah.
And that's also the biggest problem we see in the GI space as well, because patients are usually recommended the low-FODMAP diet and told to go Google it yourself and try it out, see if it works for you, or they're
Yeah.
given a one-page handout. Let's see if I have anything here. I have a good handout. So if anybody wants a grocery list, we have a free low-FODMAP starter kit on our
Oh, that's
website. So
awesome.
you can go to
Love that.
ibsdietitian.com/resources. And we also have a webinar
Awesome.
as well to teach you more about the low-FODMAP diet and how to actually work through it.
Perfect. I'll put all this in the show notes too.
Sounds good. I need to send you the links. Okay.
Oh yeah,
But
that'd be great.
oftentimes, patients get this yes and no list, be like, okay, you can eat this, you cannot eat this. That
Mhm.
is just wrong because there
Yeah.
are specific serving sizes that people can still have. I'll give you an example. For example, with broccolis, you can still have half a cup of broccoli. And with broccoli, the greens are
Most
low
people,
FODMAP.
that's like all they have anyway in a day.
Yeah. Yes. And, there's so many nuances to it. And a lot of the times, what we see is patients become hyper vigilant with the diet, with cutting out food. And when you cut out, yes, all of the fiber, it actually impacts your gut function, right? Our guts really need the fiber. And what we encourage our clients to do is let's make sure you are still getting enough low FODMAP fiber to support proper gut function, because that is key to having good motility. It's key to have better bowel movements, and we're always helping our clients get to that type 3 or type 4 of bowel movements, so that it feels good to have an evacuation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
okay, so with low FODMAP, it's short-term elimination. So once people do low FODMAP, usually ideally under the guidance of a dietitian for 2 to 6 weeks, we do a systematic reintroduction of the FODMAP foods. And what we do in our clinic is we break down the FODMAP groups, so the 6 primary groups of FODMAPs, into 12 FODMAP groups and FODMAP subgroups, and reintroduce it group by group to see if anything triggers the symptoms. And we do have specific amounts that we have to reintroduce over 3 days.
Mhm.
And then that
It's a
way,
process.
right, it is a process. And after the reintroduction, we will identify if certain things will trigger more symptoms than the others. And usually, after working together, they will be tolerating most of the FODMAP groups, if not all, at least in the smaller quantities. And we will really encourage our clients to keep eating the small amounts that you can tolerate and it makes you feel good,
Yeah.
because that's going to feed the microbes that can help you break down
Yeah.
that groups of FODMAPs, and in the long run you will improve, your tolerance will improve. Now that's the low FODMAP diet, and FODMAP tolerance will change according to a person's diet, according to their state of their gut health. And that's one thing we really want to get the word out. Hey, this is not a forever diet. Work on the foundation of your gut health. Actually, let's resolve whatever is causing your IBS symptoms.
Yeah.
And then slowly and systematically reintroduce the FODMAP foods to identify your triggers and expand your diet.
Yeah. Something I wanted to say about
Mhm.
that, I feel like there's this temptation with any condition or anything diet related to be all or nothing about it. And like, let's say somebody gets an IBS diagnosis, they, without having the guidance of somebody like yourself, Jessie, they might just go online and start Googling it and think, well, I'm just not supposed to have FODMAPs ever again. But it's so refreshing to hear the other side of that from you, a professional in this field, where it's like, well, no, we still want you to have them at the levels that you can tolerate it because they're still good for you. And then my other thought on that too is that a lot of times we just get so much misinformation, especially on the internet, about nutrition, and
Mhm.
people love jumping on different diets because they're, magical for whatever reason. And I feel like sometimes I see people doing the FODMAP diet forever because they just think that FODMAPs are inherently quote unquote
Mm.
bad, which
Yeah.
is like, to your point, they're helping your gut bacteria. Like
Mhm.
we need, it's good for the bacteria and the microbes. And so it's just so crazy how these things get lost in translation, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody's saying to cut these out, period, just because
Mhm.
you have an IBS diagnosis. Rather, let's just figure out at what degree these things might be exacerbating your symptoms, which takes some work and it takes some time. It's
Yes,
not
and
all or
I love
nothing.
you putting that spotlight on the hyper focus when somebody's maybe on the low FODMAP diet. And sometimes I have a social media presence, right? And sometimes we get trolls to come in and comment on my posts and talking
Love the
about how,
trolls. They're great.
right, how, I'm too relaxed with my FODMAP recommendations.
Oh,
I think
goodness.
for a while I took it, as they're attacking me and my
Yeah.
integrity as a provider. But,
It's hard not to
you
take it
know,
that way.
right. And after working with a lot more clients, and this is one of what my one of my clients said to me, it's either low FODMAP or running to the bathroom 10 times a day. When
Yeah.
you hear that, then these people are actually struggling. They don't know they can expand the diets. But the key
Hmm.
is really to understand what is going on with their body, what are causing their IBS symptoms. And if it's okay, I can share a client story who said that.
Yeah.
So this is a client whom I worked with last year. She actually joined me on one of my podcast episodes as well, that will be airing soon. I don't know when, but
TBD.
she, TBD, yes, she had the perfect gut. She's actually a small business owner herself, and she was fine until she had COVID and she never quite recovered. So,
Oh, interesting.
what we call her type of IBS is actually post infectious IBS. So, you've gotten an infection, whatever type it is, food poisoning, virus, bacterial infection, or sometimes even parasites, and then you get treated for that condition. That condition is recovered, right? No more COVID or no more parasites in your gut. Parasites is not a common thing in North America. If you hear a provider who is not a legitimate provider talking about parasites, run. Okay, it's not common. Does it happen? Sometimes, but
It's a
most of the
good
time it
footnote.
is
Yeah.
not. But anyways, so she had COVID, and then her gut was never the same again, and she started having nonstop diarrhea.
Mm.
It was terrible. And she went to her doctor, and then she was recommended to try the Low-FODMAP diet. And she has to follow it strictly, or else, like she said, it's either Low-FODMAP or running to the bathroom 10 times a day. So when we started working together, we do a detailed intake and then to also look at what she's eating, what her symptoms are, and what her bowel movement looks like. If you're interested in learning more about bowel movement, we have a website that is purely educational. It's called
It is the
pooppedia.org.
best website ever. I was going to talk about this. I was having so much fun going through it yesterday.
Oh, well, thank you for checking it out. But so she was having the type 6 and type 7 of stool every single day, no matter what, if she's
Mm.
not eating low FODMAP. And it's, like when you have only that one diet to hang on to so that you can have some resemblance of a normal life,
Yeah,
it's really hard not to, kind of drill down on it. But that's also when we see
totally.
the problem is,
Yeah.
is people start, if they still have a flare up, and they start taking out more and more food, even on the low FODMAP list. And they come to us sometimes with just 5 foods that they feel safe eating. And
Yeah.
our job is really to help them expand. So for her
Hmm.
case, what I suspected pretty quickly is probably she has what we call non celiac wheat sensitivity or an undiagnosed celiac. So, celiac is a genetic autoimmune disease. So, when your gene gets turned on, you have the condition. Now, a lot of people carry the celiac genes. It's HLA-DQA2 and HLA-DQA8. And then there are subvariants of the gene. Only 30% of the people with the genes will develop celiac per research. But then again, most celiac patients are not diagnosed.
Hmm.
So she lives in a rural area and was not tested for celiac properly. So I can't say for sure she doesn't have celiac. We don't know because it wasn't tested properly, and she's not willing to do the gluten challenge again. So eating
Yeah.
gluten for 6 to 8 weeks to do the test. Right. But what we saw after looking at what she's eating, her symptoms, and her bowel habits is we said, let's, try out a gluten-free diet and let's see how it affects you.
Yeah.
The gluten-free diet is one diet that every time we recommend it, it breaks our hearts a little bit.
Yeah.
because it is so hard. Like, contrary
Yeah.
to what people think is just removing food, with removing bread, pasta, donuts, or cupcakes or
Yeah.
whatever,
And it's hard.
it's reading labels intensely, making sure there's no wheat or components of gluten or wheat, barley, and rye, or derivatives of wheat, barley, and rye in a product. And then it's also looking at how people prepares your food for you. There's no cross
Yeah.
contact in the kitchen. It's such a
It's
difficult
rough.
diet, so we really don't recommend it lightly. But for her case, once she got on the gluten-free diet, her symptoms improved. And then we started looking at, okay, where the gluten could be coming from. All right, did you have a jar of peanut butter that somebody might have double dipped with a regular bread in it, right? Or
Yeah.
is it something else? And then making all those adjustments and really getting her symptom down to baseline. And then we
Yeah.
challenge gluten over 4 days with sourdough bread. And there's a reason why we do that, because there are other components in wheat that can trigger symptoms. So when we do the challenge, she reacted to it pretty immediately. I think maybe the second day she reacted to it. So a slight delay in reaction. And that's sometimes what we see as well, is delay in reaction to wheat or to FODMAPs. Now, wheat is kind of interesting because wheat has FODMAPs, it has the fructan group. So we want to differentiate it, which is why we use sourdough, which is fermented wheat flour that does not have FODMAP in it, and it does not have ATI. So ATI is
Hmm.
another potential irritant for patients with IBS. We don't fully understand it just yet. And then the other component is, of course, gluten, which is a protein. So ATI and fructan are both carbohydrates. Actually, ATI is a protein, but then it gets broken down with the fermentation process. So we want to differentiate the different things and actually challenge only one group of the food, of only one component from wheat, to see if she tolerates it or not. And we found that she doesn't tolerate it. And what we
Yeah.
see
It's
in our
interesting.
clinic too is that in these cases, if a person is gluten intolerant, once we remove the gluten from their diet, their tolerance to FODMAPs will improve over time.
Oh,
Because
yeah. That makes
FODMAPs,
sense.
when it gets into the gut, it does irritate the gut for those of us who have a more sensitive gut. And if you are
Yeah.
gluten intolerant, you will have a very sensitive gut if you continue to eat gluten, even in trace amounts. But again, you don't want to just cut out gluten and be like, okay, I'm gluten free, I'm cutting out gluten forever. That's no fun, right? You
And then
you really
never
want to
test it
know
and make
that,
sure. Yeah.
right? So you really want to
Yeah.
know that for sure. And as of now, we just don't have any test out there to identify gluten intolerance. No, IgG
Yeah.
test does not identify it. Um, but the only way to do is
Which is what a
eliminate.
food sensitivity test is.
Yes,
Run,
eliminate and
ignore.
reintroduce. If you've done those tests, I'm so sorry for you. Toss it away. And,
Yes. Try and get a refund.
I don't know if that will happen, but good luck.
Probably not. Probably
Yes.
not.
Yep.
So I have a
hmm
question for you. I mean, obviously, with each case, there's going to be different triggers. There needs to be some investigation. We need to be a bit of a detective. When it comes, you mentioned the gut-brain interaction there. How much does anxiety play into IBS-like symptoms or IBS in general?
Yes, so anxiety is huge. Now, I would argue that stress did not cause you to have IBS, but stress exacerbates your IBS symptoms, and it
Got
can
it.
be a vicious cycle
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to trying to manage your IBS. So, when it comes to the gut brain connection part of or the stress part, this is where finding the right routine and maybe making modifications to your lifestyle can be extremely helpful. And that's in our clinic, we have a 3 steps approach. Step one is identifying the food trigger. Step two is actually modifying your lifestyle so that you are managing your stress better, or we are doing things that improves your gut brain connection, like exercises, like deep diaphragmatic breathing, that
Yeah.
actually improve your gut brain connection, actually help you feel less of the pain or the bloating. It decreases this gut sensitivity. And then also finding a routine that works well for a person, right, to have better evacuations, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the cases we see are also IBS constipation that may not have any food triggers. But at the end of the day, what we really need to do is improve your evacuations and make sure you are fully evacuating every single day so that you feel good. You
Yeah.
don't have build up gas or build up stool in your colon that's continuously giving you that dull pain or colonic spasms that just are unbearable. But
Mm.
this is a process, right?
Yeah.
Improving gut motility is a long process. Even for kids, it can take 6 months. For adults, if you've had constipation all your life or maybe for years, it's going to take some time for your gut, for your colon to regain that sensitivity and elasticity to help you have a full evacuation.
Mm. Yeah.
But I would have to say, don't be afraid of over the counter laxative. They are well studied, they are very safe, which is why they are over the counter. Like, talk to your physician and create a regimen that actually works for you so that you are having that full evacuations every day.
Yeah.
Once you have that for patients with IBS-C or even mixed bowel type, you are going to feel so much better. And I would say a lot of the times that's what we start with, a higher dose of over the counter laxative to help a client really clean out and then work on their dietary habits, right? Eating 3 good meals a day, having a cup of more coffee in the morning, and then also work on other things to make sure they have good evacuations. And then we slowly dose down the laxative as the other aspects of their life improves. And the big
Yeah.
thing is also eating enough fiber, but we don't want to just shove fiber supplements down somebody's
Yeah.
throats
That's not a
because
great
if
idea either.
no, because if you're already constipated, you're going to feel so much worse when that
Yeah.
happens. And it may send you directly to diarrhea if you are, not already running to the bathroom or if you're not
It's a
already so
process.
distended and so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's a process. And
Yeah.
here's a few things, I want to share before we wrap up the conversation on constipation and improving gut motility. Hydration is extremely important. Fiber intake from a variety of sources is extremely important. Aim for 25 to 35 grams of fiber daily. 90% of Americans are not hitting their fiber goals on a daily
Yeah.
basis, myself included. It's difficult. Work with a
Yeah.
dietitian to help you really work on those small lifestyle changes that can help you get there. And I
Yeah.
say small because it starts with planning and then grocery shopping and then making sure
Right.
they are available at home in your fridge, in your freezer. All right.
Yeah.
And then other things to think about is hormonal fluctuations, especially for women, right? The normal
Mm-hmm.
hormone fluctuations. Right before our menstruation cycle, usually we are more constipated. And that's universal probably to most women because of our hormone progesterone. It slows down the gut. And then when your period starts, there's another hormone like prostaglandin that actually helps our uterus contract for our periods to be more what do you say, to extract the things that we need to extract from our uterus. But that hormone can actually cause us to have diarrhea, which is a term we call the period poop, right? So when you have
Yeah.
your period, you have more diarrhea. So hormonal fluctuation is a thing, but it's not something you need to change, but more so a thing that you want to understand more. So maybe right before your periods, you're more prone to having constipation. It's okay to use some over the counter laxative
Yeah.
and focus on hydration, focus on getting enough fiber, eating more anti inflammatory fruits and vegetables, and maybe sleeping more. Work on your stress, do some more deep diaphragmatic breathing. So these are all things that can help with gut motility.
Mm-hmm.
And if none of these works for you, then that's when we think about maybe we want to investigate food intolerance.
Yeah.
And that is via maybe the low-FODMAP diet or gluten-free diets. But remember, it's never a long-term diet. We want to challenge to be sure that you are actually intolerant to some of these foods. We don't want to automatically assume you have to
Yeah.
cut things out.
Which, yeah, I think is so important here and is probably what we see the most often is that people just immediately go to eliminating foods, which is not only burdensome because that's just like to remove things from your options of what you can eat is going to be stressful no matter what, but also unnecessary and even harmful at some points or a lot of points because now your gut is lacking the variety that it really needs. and potentially worsening symptoms. And I think something too that you kind of alluded to this earlier, but just that vicious cycle of feeling a certain way. So then we eliminate foods and maybe we feel stress about that as well. Now that we're trying to eliminate something like gluten, for example, and that's stressful, right? That's a food that a lot of us love to have, or a component of food that a lot of us want to include in our life. And now you're potentially unnecessarily restricting something plus adding that stress on top. So that might be exacerbating your symptoms even more. And it's just a vicious cycle. And I think it's the like take home message here that I hope people are getting out of this is like, don't just go eliminating foods hoping something will magically get fixed, because that can be more harmful and worsen symptoms. Maybe not initially, but over time, for sure. If it weren't necessary, maybe by some magical chance, the things you eliminate are genuinely what you needed to eliminate. But to Jessie's point too, you might be okay in some tolerance levels there and some portion sizes. So it's, yeah, like I think when we're so desperate to feel better, we'll do anything. And usually that's the anything we're told by the internet or the influencers or the coaches or the functional people, is to just eliminate. And it's a bummer and it's a shame.
It really is. And yes, and we're not blaming patients here, but then I think
No, not at all.
this is a very vulnerable population with GI disorders, because one diagnosis is so hard and the discomfort is just very real, but they're invisible. So other people cannot see your
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah.
And that vulnerability led to business opportunity from the predatory businesses to prey on patients with GI disorders. So, we
Right.
are really extending, I would say, our sadness maybe, because we try to educate as much as we can the evidence-based side of things, but I think there's still so much, bad intentions people lurking around in the background. I don't know if they're really bad intention, because I think sometimes also to these practitioners, they think they're doing the good thing, but they just
They
not.
do. Well, and that's the thing. Sometimes it's just poor information. It's not that they had the right information and are straight up neglecting it, which can be the case. But I think a lot of times it's ignorance, and which maybe is even more dangerous because the people really do believe in what they're doing, and that's compelling to people, thinking of like chiropractors in particular. They are one of the worst for like quote unquote functional nutrition, quote unquote solutions, and a lot of quotation marks here. And they really believe it. They really, really do. And they stand behind their recommendations, which brings the patients confidence in what they're being recommended and going along with it, which is a shame, Again, just bad information. But what do we know? We're just mainstream dietitians, right?
Well, also got to say there are some dietitians that also do these things. I think the hair analysis one that you mentioned, Andrea's jumping onto my podcast tomorrow, and that's one of the ones I want her to debunk and give her a whole list. I'm like, let's talk about, and I'm seeing a dietitian promote it a lot. And that's really,
and also the GI map. I see a lot of dietitians do those as well.
Yeah, so it's I hope they'll come to the conference with us. I think that's maybe that's the best we can hope for. But
or listen to the podcasts. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. I think it's really, really valuable, just as we were talking about, to get the education out there and the information out there about just the different nuances that are involved here. And again, like, take home message is that this doesn't need to be an all or nothing thing. Don't let it be. And also be sure that you actually do need to eliminate something. Like, do your due diligence to address the other areas of your life, the lifestyle things, the fiber intake, the hydration, the sleep, the exercise. Like, do your due diligence to address all of those things first. Even your relationship with food. You guys know I'm very passionate about your relationship with food. And really just to have a neutral one. Don't make it a big deal. And don't stress about it either, because that can ultimately be exacerbating some IBS symptoms and making things worse. So yeah, then if you're like, no, I really do have something going on here, then you can really start to be a detective and bring on some professionals if you haven't
Mm-hmm.
already. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think this is so good and so valuable. And I'm sure I'll have a lot of questions and feedback on this. So we might have to have you back for some follow-up questions.
Anytime.
But you will have your own show coming out soon, and you've got amazing resources. We kind of quickly touched on poopedia.org, which is incredible. I just poked around it yesterday. There's different photos of real stool that you
Mm-hmm.
can compare to and see what type you are. There's also a little chart for what the different colors mean of your stool, and even odor. I've never heard anybody talk about the different odors and smells and what that might mean. I was like, what? This is so cool. And I'm just totally nerding out about it. So, anybody who's interested in knowing what your poop means, that's a great resource, poopedia.org. We'll put it in the show notes. And then, yeah, Jessie has amazing resources. Even your Instagram is incredible. I was cracking up at you have a really good reels that are based on memes.
Oh,
Like, they're so funny.
like the farting, your pain, stomach pain away one.
Yeah.
I love that.
So good. Somebody just running away in the field. It's so funny and so relatable. And I know even I don't think I have IBS, but even your memes, I'm like, I can still relate to that at certain points in my life. I felt that way for whatever reason. So it's good. Sometimes you just got to laugh about the things that are causing you pain.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think a little
So
humor really helps mitigate or feel
a
better
little
about
humor goes
having
a
an
long way.
invisible
Yeah.
illness. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that I missed in terms of how people can find you or reach out to you or resources that you've got available? Anything that I missed?
I think we've got it all. And feel
Okay.
free to follow at on Instagram at ibs.dietitian.
Yes, she's awesome. Evidence-based. That's what I love. But yes, because there's a lot of IBS
Mm-hmm.
things that are not evidence-based and are pretty predatory. So please follow my friend Jessie because she is, and she's the best.
Thank you, Michelle.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, cheers to all of you with IBS. We're here for you.